Good morning. Once again, so glad to be in church. Thank you all for joining us this morning. If there's ever any way we can serve you, or if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Today we are launching into a brand new 6-week sermon series entitled Cop-Outs. What is a cop-out? A cop-out is a poor excuse for not doing something that you should do. So just to be clear, because this is important, a cop-out isn't just an excuse. A cop-out is a poor excuse. Maybe you've tried to get out of going to work when you should have went to work. Boss, sorry, I can't come in this morning. I can't get my car to start. Of course, you leave out the part about how you never tried to start it. Maybe you've called in sick when you weren't really sick. The job I had prior to entering into full-time ministry, people would call in sick every single day, and they would come up with some wild, off-the-wall excuses. Their favorite was food poisoning. Sorry, I can't come into work. I have food poisoning. Sorry, I can't come into work. My dog doesn't feel well. Sorry, I can't come into work. I didn't get much sleep last night. Sorry, I can't come into work today. My relative passed away. Now, that might sound like a legitimate excuse, but some of them had the same relative pass away 6 times within a 3-month period. They would lie, they would say, they would do anything to get themselves out of going to work. Maybe you've had a birthday party to attend, a wedding, a family get-together, a lunch meeting. Maybe there was something you were supposed to go to, but you didn't want to go. So you came up with a lousy excuse to get out of it. Sorry, I can't make it. Something has come up. Of course, you fail to mention what has come up is a new show on Netflix that you've been binge watching for the past 3 days. Maybe you do this around the house. If there's one thing I despise doing, it's changing dirty diapers. And my boys, I don't mean to be gross, but you would be shocked by what can come out of their little bodies. It can't be normal. So when I smell a dirty diaper, I immediately find something to do. I'll go cut the grass for the 2nd time that day. I'll go take a shower. I'll go pretend to make an important phone call. I'll go sit in the bathroom. I get as far away from that dirty diaper as I possibly can so that when my wife discovers it, me changing it won't even be an option. And yes, I'll be in trouble for sharing that with you. Here's the point. We have all come up with excuses to get out of doing something we didn't want to do. And here's what I'm afraid of. Here's why I believe the Lord has laid this sermon series on my heart. Not only do we come up with excuses, not only do we come up with cop-outs in our daily lives, we have a tendency to do it in our walk with the Lord. And those excuses are preventing us from taking action. Those excuses are preventing us from being obedient. And those excuses are preventing us from becoming the people that God calls us to be. Throughout this series, over the next 6 weeks, we're going to take a look at 6 instances in the Bible where people missed out or almost missed out on what God had for them, simply because they chose excuses over action. And these 6 excuses, these 6 cop-outs that we're going to look at, are 6 excuses that most of us make on a regular basis. If you'll open your Bibles with me to Genesis chapter 19. If you don't have your Bible with you, they're going to put the words on the screens when we get there, so you can follow along there. Week 1, our first cop-out. It is what it is. Maybe you've said that before. It is what it is. Before we jump into Genesis chapter 19, let me give you the backstory. There was this guy named Lot, and he chose to live in this place called Sodom. Here was the problem. Sodom was an evil and corrupt place. There was all this sin. The people had no shame. So why did Lot stay? Why didn't Lot pack his bags and leave? I think he was focused on the advantages of living in Sodom, and I think he ignored all of the disadvantages. I think he knew he was in a place he shouldn't have been, but he became complacent. He had this "it is what it is" attitude. And eventually Sodom gets so evil, it gets so corrupt that God decides to destroy it. But being the merciful God that he is, he gives Lot and his family an opportunity to escape. So that's where we're going to pick up. Genesis chapter 19, verse 1. As I read through this passage, I'm going to point out three things about complacency. It says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So these two angels come into Sodom. When Lot sees them, he runs to them. He bows before them. He invites them to come and stay at his house. They're reluctant, but they finally agree to come stay at his house. They get back to his house. They're eating. They're kicking back. They're enjoying some bread. Verse 4. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." So Lot has these two angels over at his house. They're about to lay down and call it a night. But the men of Sodom surround Lot's house and they say, "Where are those two men?" This is pretty twisted. "Bring them out to us so that we can rape them, so that we can have sexual relations with them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have two daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." So Lot pleads with these men. He says, "Please don't do this wicked thing. Please leave these men alone. They're guests in my house. I have two virgin daughters. I'll send them out to you. Do whatever you want with them. Just leave these two men alone." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew back to break the door down. But the men, the angels, reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so they wore themselves out groping for the door. So the men of Sodom are persistent. They aren't taking no for an answer. They start coming after Lot. The angels inside the house manage to reach out and bring Lot inside. And then they strike the men on the outside with blindness so that they can't get inside. That leads me to my first point about complacency. Number one, complacency leads to oversight. Complacency leads to oversight. I'm your typical redneck, which means I think I can do just about anything around the house. If I don't know how to do it, I'll find out how to do it in just a couple of minutes by watching videos on YouTube. I always have some kind of project going, and when I make a mistake, which happens very frequently, maybe I cut a board too short, maybe I'm painting a wall and I get some on the ceiling, maybe I hang a picture crooked, maybe I install something on level. When I make a mistake, I have a decision to make. I can live with my mistake and move on, or I can stop and fix it correctly. And here's what I've come to realize. Some of you can probably relate to this. When I choose to live with my mistake, for the first couple of weeks, that mistake sticks out like a sore thumb. Every time I see it, I get angry. I regret not taking the time to fix it correctly. But as time passes on, it becomes less and less noticeable. Eventually it gets to the point where I learn to overlook it and I stop noticing it altogether. The same is true when it comes to your spiritual life. When you make the decision to become complacent, when you have this "it is what it is" attitude, you choose to settle. You choose to compromise. At first, there's probably an internal struggle. You have this gut feeling. You know you're not making the right decision. But as time passes on, you feel less and you overlook more. That sin you said you would never commit, now you commit it without feeling any conviction. That call you refuse to pursue. At first there was an internal struggle. At first it ate you alive, but now you've become numb to it. That's what I think happened to Lot. He chose to live in this corrupt place. I'm sure he knew he was living in a place he didn't need to live. At first, I'm sure there was an internal struggle. I'm sure he contemplated leaving from time to time. I'm sure it bothered him. So why did he stay? He became complacent. He had this "it is what it is" attitude. And here we see men surrounding his house, wanting to have sexual relations with other men. What does Lot do? He offers his 2 daughters. Take my daughters and have your way with them. How twisted is that? Number 1, complacency leads to oversight. Getting back to the story, verse 12. Then the men, the angels, said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. So the angels tell Lot what's about to go down. "Look, we're about to destroy this place. You need to go and tell your family members and your friends that they need to get out." So Lot goes, he starts telling people, but most of the people he tells, they think he's joking. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." So morning rolls around. The angels urge Lot, "Look, you need to get out of here right now before it's too late." What does Lot do? He lingers. The angels have to literally take him by the hand and drag him out of the city. Which leads to the second point about complacency. Number 2, complacency leads to comfort. Complacency leads to comfort. The hardest part of my day, usually hands down, is getting out of bed in the morning. I don't fall asleep fast or easy, but when I fall asleep, I fall into a deep, deep, deep sleep. When my alarm clock goes off in the morning, if I hear it, and that's a big if, I hit snooze so many times, I leave myself with literally 30 seconds to get out of bed and to get to where I need to go. Why is it so difficult to get out of the bed in the morning? Because the bed is a comfortable place. And here's the thing about comfort. It's usually easy to enter and difficult to exit. Here's what's wrong with comfort for an extended period of time. No one grows inside of their comfort zone. It's when you get outside of your comfort zone. It's when you try something new. It's when you put yourself in an awkward situation. It's when you embrace what's unfamiliar. That is when you're going to grow and learn. At one point in my life, public speaking was the most terrifying thing there was. If I had stayed inside of my comfort zone, I wouldn't be doing what God created me to do. Do you want to one day look back and regret playing it so safe? Do you want to settle? Then stay trapped inside your comfort zone. Or do you want to live to the fullest? Do you want to become who God created you to be? Then become comfortable with the uncomfortable. Become comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's what we should do as believers, as a church. Our comfort zone should be what is uncomfortable. We should step out, embrace awkward situations, and do what the Lord has called us to be. You see, your comfort zone really isn't a zone at all. It's much more like a cage. And the longer you stay inside of it, the harder it becomes to escape it. The city of Sodom is about to be destroyed. Why would Lot linger? Here's why. He became so comfortable in a place he didn't need to be in, and he just couldn't let go. He stayed in so long, it was almost impossible to escape. Number one, complacency leads to oversight. Number two, complacency leads to comfort. And number three, complacency leads to destruction. Ultimately, complacency leads to destruction. So Lot and his family are escaping the city of Sodom. Fast forward a few verses to verse 23. This is what it says. It says, the sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities. And what grew on the ground, but Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So they're fleeing out of Sodom. And Lot's wife does what? She looks back. Why does she look back? I believe she was so attached to Sodom, she just couldn't let it go. So she looks back. What happens? She becomes a pillar of salt. Fast forward a few more verses to the end of Genesis chapter 19, and here's what you're going to read. Again, it's twisted. Lot's daughters get him drunk. They sleep with him, and Lot becomes pregnant. Or Lot's daughters become pregnant with their father's baby. What happened to Lot? What happened to his family? I'm sure that's not what he wanted for his life. I'm sure that's not what he wanted for his children. I'm sure he didn't want his grandchildren to be his own children. I think it's safe to say Lot made it out of Sodom alive, but his complacency led to destruction. Maybe you're here today and you say, man, I always thought my life would amount to more. Maybe you feel you're not making much of a difference. Maybe you're not happy. Maybe you have very little passion about what you do. Maybe you've become complacent. Maybe you have this "it is what it is" attitude. Maybe that's led to oversight on your behalf. Maybe that's led to comfort. Maybe you're comfortable in a place you shouldn't be. Don't let it lead to the destruction of you and your family. I've shared this before, but I'll share it again. I remember when I was in high school, I was at a wrestling practice, and for whatever reason, I made this comment to my wrestling coach. I said, "Coach, it is what it is." He got angry. I mean angry. And he snapped back. He said, "No, Sean, that's a terrible attitude. It is what you make it. It is what you make it." As much as I disliked that coach at that time, I have to agree he had a pretty valid point. Here's what I'll close this message out with, and then we're going to move on. We're going to have the Lord's Supper. If you've heard nothing else that I've said over the past few minutes, focus in and hear this. It is what it is. No, it is what you make it. It is what you make it. So go out, refuse to become complacent, refuse to get comfortable, refuse to have this "it is what it is" attitude, and become who God created you to be.